Hello. In this video, we're going to go through the new workflow for setting up and driving your own characters with Audio2Face. This 2022 release introduces the ability to drive all the facial features of a digital character. Before diving into the hands-on tutorial, let's take a look at the principles behind the full face animation and the character retargeting inside Audio2Face. In a very simple way, given an audio, the A2F network generates the mesh displacements that drive the meshes of the skin and the tongue. Additionally, the network generates the necessary transforms to drive the motion of the eyes and the jaw. In order to drive a custom character, we need to have a similar setup. First, our character needs to have a single continuous skin mesh. That is, a mesh that is not composed of several disjoint parts. We also need individual meshes for the lower denture and the tongue. Additionally, these elements need to be separated from other components of the mouth, like the upper teeth or the throat. Finally, we need left and right eyes. These eyes can be composed of several meshes for the different parts of the eye, such as the cornea, the irises, the sclera, or also they can simply be combined into a single mesh. The important thing is that the left and right eyes need to be effectively separated from each other. With a new character, it is not possible to drive arbitrary skin and tongue meshes directly with the A2F network. The reason is that the network is trained to output the displacements for very specific mesh topology, such as the A2F male character. Instead, we need to retarget the A2F animation to our character. This requires establishing a mapping between the two meshes. This can be achieved by giving few correspondences to guide the mapping process. Then, with a new audio, the network drives the A2F mesh, and this animation is then retargeted to the character. Since the output for the jaw and the eye motions are transforms, this can be controlled directly by the Audio2Face network. Let's move on now to the Audio2Face application to go through the process of driving a custom character in the Omniverse. Now that we are inside the Audio2Face application, let's dive into a hands-on example on how to set up this female character. We can see by inspecting on the stage that we have all the required meshes: the skin, the teeth, the tongue, as well as the eyes. And we also have some additional meshes, such as the hair or the eyebrows, that are important for the appearance of the character. We will also see in this tutorial how to deal with these meshes. The workflow for the character retargeting can be found on the Character Transfer tab. We get started in the Character Setup section by mapping the different facial features of our character. First, the skin mesh. Basically, is the head of our character. Right now, Audio2Face does not support full body characters yet, so we will need a separate mesh for the head. Let's go and select the skin head mesh and add it to the setup. We can notice two different things. First is the character setup will perform some checks to verify that our meshes match the requirements for the character setup. In this case, we have no problems. Secondly, we can see that our character does not match the default orientation. Omniverse has a default orientation where the z-axis is the front direction and the y-axis is the up direction. However, our character is facing on the negative y-axis. We can change this by adapting the orientation to match our character orientation. Once this is done, for convenience, we can just simply hide this visualization and move to the next part. In the lower denture, we specify the components that move with the jaw. That is the lower teeth, the gums, and the tongue. So let's go and find them. And then we can move on and specify the left and right eyes. In this section, we have to specify the meshes that constitute the eyeballs. Do not include in these sections other elements such as the eyelashes or the eyebrows. These can be placed on an additional meshes section. So let's go ahead and put them into the setup. And another important aspect for the eye setting is the pivot. In order to drive the eye movements, Audio2Face will need to know the center of rotation of the eye. This can be specified in few different ways. The first one, the default one, is the case where your meshes have been parented under an X form that has been placed at the center of the eye. This is the case of this character. So we could use this parent X form option to get the pivot information. Another situation is where your mesh origin itself is at the center of the eye. Then you can use this select mesh wall position. If we select one of the eye meshes, we will see that actually the origin of this mesh is at the center of the wall. So we cannot use this option with these character meshes. The last option is in the case that we don't have any information related to the pivot, we can let Audio2Face to compute automatically the pivot based on the geometry of the meshes. So for this case, let's just use the default option. And you can refer also to the documentation for more details on these options. Finally, we can identify any additional parts of our character that are either static or dynamic. By static, I mean the parts that are fixed with respect to the head, such as the hair, the upper teeth, or the gums. And by dynamic, we refer to those elements that should move together with the skin, such as the eyelashes, the eyebrows, or a mustache, to name a few examples. We can attach these elements so they can move together with the skin in a later step. So for the static meshes, we will have the hair and the upper teeth. And for the dynamic, we will have the brows, the lacrima, as well as the eyelashes. We can then continue by setting up our character. Here we will also receive some warnings if there is some problems. In this case, we get a warning that our X forms will be reoriented to have the Z front and Y up direction standard. If we check our character, we will see that our pivot is not oriented in that direction, is actually facing on the negative Y direction as our character. So this just informs that in our setup, this direction will be set to Z front. So not a big problem, so we can just simply go ahead and proceed. By proceeding, the Setup Character button will create a compatible setup. And this setup, you can find it under the Transfer Character group. This setup is already placed. As you can see here, we have the eye groups. And in this case, the eye group is reoriented to have the Z front and Y up standard. And also, it will import the necessary templates for the next step. And you can find these templates here on the A to F templates. The skin meshes is already automatically filled by the character setup, so we can move to the next step, which is to establish the mapping between our character and the A to F mesh. This can be done on the skin mesh fitting section. Here, we need to create some manual correspondences in order to guide the dense mapping of our character to the template. Usually this part might require a few iterations until we get a good fit. One tip that I have is that usually it's nice to hide all the meshes except for the skin itself. That makes the setting up the correspondence a bit more simple. Then we can select the green mark and our character and press F to focus. And this will allow us to kind of orient our character a bit more easily for setting up the correspondences. We can add some correspondence in the add mode. And this is done by just simply first in one mesh and then on the other. The other is not important, so we can switch it. And we can place some more correspondences until we are satisfied. Then we can escape this mode. If we need it to fix some of the position of our correspondences, we can enter the edit mode and then drag the correspondence position to refine them. Once we are satisfied, we can also save our correspondences for use them a bit later in a JSON file. And this is what I did previously for this when preparing for this tutorial. So we can go ahead and also load them. And you can see that I prepare few correspondences with a special attention on the eyes and the mouth, where these are the areas that the characters are more expressive. With this correspondence set, we can then move to the next step, which is beginning the mesh fitting process. This will create a mapping between the two meshes. The way to visualize that it's a good mapping is by checking that our mesh actually matches quite closely to the original mark template. In this case, we have a pretty good match, so we can proceed to the next step. One other thing that is maybe a bit hidden is that if we now save the correspondences again after the mesh fitting process, we are given the chance to actually save the fitted result together with the correspondences. This way, if we need to continue doing this process again for other audios or another day, we don't need to refit the mesh. In this case, it's not very slow, but for other meshes can be a bit lengthy process. So this is an option to take into account. All right, so now that we have a good fit, we can move to the post-wrap step. This post-wrap step will set up the mesh for retargeting and apply multiple deformers to make the live connection between our character and Audio2Face. We can check in the transfer character that the post-wrap has been successful because we will have a skin mesh result. And this will be the mesh that will be driven by Audio2Face. The original mesh has been hidden in case it is needed if you want to restart the mesh fitting process. We continue with a similar process for the lower denture by preparing the jaw motion, then starting the mesh fitting for the tongue, and then also again the tongue mesh post-wrap. However, in this case, we don't need to specify any correspondences. At this point, we almost set up. We can then attach our additional dynamic meshes to the skin. The way to do that is by using the Prox Ui. Here in the tools, we can bring the UI. And if we follow the instructions, we will see that in order to use this tool, we first need to select the mesh, which is the driver. So in this case, will be our skin. And then we can select the other meshes that need to be attached. We can apply this independently, but for the purpose of this tutorial, I will apply all of them at the same time, so they will all have the same settings, but you can apply them separately if needed. So if it's successful, it will show up, so then we can just simply close the UI. Now we are ready to start driving our character with Audio2Face. The last step is basically set up the Audio2Face pipeline on the A2F mesh. So we can select it and then click on the A2F pipeline on the Audio2Face tool. And it's important that we select the full face core. You have to select only one mesh. I select maybe more than one. And then it will show that we can attach the pipeline to this mesh. It's important to choose the full face so that we can actually drive all the features of the face. Then we can just simply click yes and attach. And the last step, we need to connect the different elements here. If you remember, the face, the skin mesh, and the tongue, the Audio2Face will drive the template directly. So here, the skin mesh has been already set, but the mesh has to come from the template. And here in the A2F templates, we can select the tongue and then just edit to the attached prims. However, the X forms will be drive the character directly. So we can go into our transfer character and find the different X forms. So the first one is the left eye group, then the right eye group, and finally the lower denture group. With this, we concluded the setting of our character. We can bring back all the meshes, such as the extras, and then we can play the animation to see how this character is being driven by the Audio2Face.
The beige hue on the waters of the loch impressed all, including the French queen, before she heard that symphony again, just as young Arthur wanted.